Hello and welcome to PRSay. This is the official award-winning podcast of the PRSA Houston chapter. And here on the podcast, we get to meet all of our members and connect and make sure that our chapter is growing and we are keeping the network alive. So this is our way to connect with each other when we can't meet in person. So if you are listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of PRSay. And if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop us some comments so that my guests and I can be sure to connect with each other. So let's go ahead and bring on our guest today. We have Joanne Miceli-Bogash. Thank you so much for joining us. So excited to connect with you.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you so much, Veronica.
You bet, you bet. So, Joanne, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here in the communication space in the Houston area.
Okay. I moved to Texas 3 years ago from Florida. I became a member of the PRSA Gulfstream chapter, which is Fort Lauderdale. I had been involved in the marketing field, working for a travel sampling company. We worked with companies such as Nabisco and Unilever and all sorts of snacks confectionery. And we sampled their products at 35,000 feet. So that was kind of a really, really fun period. I then moved on and began to manage the public relations for a homeless nonprofit in Fort Lauderdale, Broward Partnership for the Homeless. I continued to do freelance PR for several smaller nonprofits around the country. But right now, my role is director of outreach priests for a Catholic ministry in Boca. That's where our headquarters are, and that is cross Catholic outreach. And my particular niche is managing the full cycle and onboarding of Catholic priests who may be retired or have weekends where they're invited by parishes across the United States to learn more about the plight of the poor, the desperate poor in developing countries. So that's kind of my space, and how we help these priests. I can't teach them how to be a priest, but I can help them to learn to tell their stories in a very impactful, inspiring way, because he has a very limited time during his homily, which is anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes, to really engage his audience. Mm-hmm. So we want to be able to help each one of them be the best they can, because they're our frontline fundraisers. Mm-hmm. Actually, they're one of our primary ways of fundraising, and that we're doing that through the Catholic Church.
That's amazing. And so you don't really think about development in that space, but that's operationally, it's a huge part. And storytelling is so connected to development. So tell us a little bit about some of the key fundamentals that maybe the priests that you work with have to be introduced to, because as storytellers, we may know it inherently, or we learned it in school or in internships or on the job. But for folks that aren't in our space, how do you become a good storyteller for the purposes of development?
Sure, that's a great question. So as Catholics, number one, we believe that just by virtue of our baptism, we're called to be missionaries. So certainly a Roman Catholic priest is a missionary. He may have been born in the United States and then introduced to the needs of the poor, maybe on mission trips, and we do support those throughout the year. Many of our priests hail from, all over the globe. They're from Africa, they're from India, they're from, Latin America, but they're each one of them, and we have 46 priests. Some are full-time, some are part-time. But they're excellent orators. They're just magnificent men. It's very important that we help them, set up and frame those stories so that they can be impactful. Sometimes we learn with new priests that are coming on, they want to tell the entire story. They want to share hundreds of examples, but that's going to go over somebody's head. So how do we fine-tune that? So we now work with a professional development coach, and he does many, many one-on-ones with every one of those priests to help them hone in what's the best way to present that example? How are we going to keep the parishioner engaged? And when they leave Mass, we want them to leave with, I want to learn more. How do I learn more about what they do? So it's all about engagement.
Right. Absolutely. And again, you don't think about that happening behind the scenes when
Right.
maybe you do go to a service, whether it's a Catholic service or you go to any other type of service, but
Absolutely.
there has to be some strategy behind that. What are some of the other techniques and strategies that you're working with them on outside of maybe face to face or maybe during the homily? What are they doing outside of the Mass that is still a part of that storytelling and development?
Okay. Um, we are providing them with a variety of resources. They certainly have our website. Our website can explain many of our projects, how we go about funding those projects. But I think your question, uh, for me, COVID taught us a lot of different ways in how we needed to operate. So masses stopped for a long time. Our priests were home. So what our ministry did was retool and put together our priests with our donors, who have always been so wonderful and generous in quote unquote good times. But we came alongside our donors because they were going through some tremendous suffering themselves. Um, COVID also allowed us, because churches began live streaming. I
Hmm.
had never been able to travel to all 20 or 30 of our priests who might be in 30 areas of the country. Now with live streaming, I'm able to watch, as many of our outreach priests over a weekend as possible, and that gives me the chance to see what they're saying, how they're presenting it, making sure that statistics are always accurate, those kinds of things. So that showed us how we can develop a training program
Hmm.
through that, and then working with them individually really helps boost their confidence, and helps them to see themselves and how they can get to a higher plane.
Hmm. That's so on the mark. And we've learned so much about COVID, whether it was working remote or virtually, or just you said retooling your training. And that's ultimately what a lot of communicators had to do. But it's opened up a new space for us to work in. And I think that that's truly phenomenal. What are
Right.
some of the challenges with working with your priests so remote? Because I know that you're based here, they're based all over the country. And how does that work for you?
Okay. Well, again, with COVID, the ministry began its, using Zoom. So everything is by Zoom. I am on the phone probably a good 4 or 5 hours a day, emailing our priests. But I did want to say that, enjoying these videos. I had the chance to watch Christine. I think it was Christine Williams recently, and she said something that was so profound. She said, "COVID kept us quiet, but we still had to be out there,
Yeah.
and using that space. So using Zoom, using live streaming really helped us because the poor needed the advocacy, just as much. So while COVID kept us quiet, we still had to be shouting. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
so
that's
that's
so true. So, so true. Especially in the nonprofit space as well. We've had some of our nonprofit peers that work in that space share how challenging that time was,
right.
but that it really opened up some opportunities as well. And it sounds like that's
Absolutely.
probably true in the ministry.
Absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely. Yeah, you
Hmm.
have to be. You can't be afraid of change, and you have to keep focused on growth in very uncomfortable spaces.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a gem. That's so true. The more uncomfortable you are, the more likely you're doing something great.
Exactly. That's when we grow. That's when we grow.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you have for someone? I find it so intriguing. honestly, I have not ever connected or networked with a communicator in the ministry space. So, what advice would you have for someone who's interested in looking at career paths that the one you followed?
Okay, so considering that my background, a lot of marketing, a lot of retail, selling very expensive things. I think as communicators, we are always quote unquote selling
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
I think the volunteer in me would say, what's your passion? Find out what that passion is and figure it out. There's never a wrong way of going about it. Trust your peers. If you find yourself in the midst of smart people, ambitious people, loving people, then you're in the right space, and you just have to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice, Joanne. Thank you so much. Are there any projects you're working on or any support any PRSA Houston members can support you with right now?
Sure. We'd love you to go to our website, which is www.crosscatholic.org. You'll find a variety of ways. As I also mentioned, I'm also a very committed and loving volunteer with the Houston Rodeo. So, Houstonians, you have to do rodeo, you have to participate, and to be a part of such a great thing here in Houston, raising needed funds, for, those who are less fortunate. And that's how we help our brothers and sisters, right
That's
next door to us.
That's right. Oh, well said, and great message to leave us with. Joanne, how can people connect with you? Are you on LinkedIn? What's the best way for folks to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and I think, let's see, I think LinkedIn is J Miceli-Bogash. I can get all that to you.
You bet.
Instagram, I'm JM Bogash.
You bet. You bet. And we will make sure, listeners, that you have those links in the show notes. So all you have to do is click on it and connect with Joanne. You have been a wonderful guest, and I so enjoyed our conversation and learning about the space that you're in. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for having me. Take care. Have a great day.
You bet. You bet. All
Bye-bye.
right, guys, that wraps up our episode. Please connect with Joanne. And I can't tell you how important those kinds of organizations are to our community. So, yes, check out the Houston Rodeo. There's tons of opportunities. A lot of our members are also involved in that great organization. So, please connect and make sure to connect with Joanne and check out the great ministry that she is supporting. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. But I'm going to remind you before we do that to click the subscribe button on any of the podcast platforms that you're listening on. We want to make sure that you don't miss any episodes of PRSay, the award-winning podcast for the Houston chapter of PRSA. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop us some comments and Joanne and I will be sure to connect. So we will catch you next time on the next episode of PRSay.